Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says now is the time for the troops to come home from Syria. And his remark, as we've been saying, stands in stark contrast to the message he's delivering in Bahrain today. He's pushing a hardline stance against Iran there, and U.S. troops in Syria are seen as a way to address that threat.
Pompeo is on a 9-nation tour throughout the Mideast and Northern Africa. He's announced plans to hold an international summit on security in the region. So for more on this, we want to bring in CBS News State Department reporter Christina Ruffini. She is joining us now from Washington. Christina, thank you so much for joining us. So it's sort of ping-ponged back and forth. The troops are going to be out in 30 days. No, not really. ISIS is done and over with. No, not really. So just first, I want to ask you about the U.S. troops withdrawing from Syria. What can you tell us about what has happened so far? What's been the reaction on Pompeo's trip from the other countries in the region?
I think I'm as confused as some of our allies are. Every time they make another announcement, it only serves to confuse people more. So today, the Pentagon, like you said, announced that the drawdown is underway. David Martin reported that we're looking at a 90 to 120-day timeline. But there are still not a lot of specifics. And once again, there are still contradictions in place. We've got these conditions that John Bolton announced in Israel over the weekend, that U.S. forces are going to stay there until ISIS is defeated, Iran is out, and we've secured protection for the Kurdish militias that fought beside us, our battlefield allies. Now, this really irritated the Turks because the Turkish government views a lot of those groups as terrorist organizations. Turkish President Erdogan was so upset he refused to meet with John Bolton when he landed in Ankara on Monday. And part of this whole pullout strategy, as Pompeo said yesterday in his speech, really depends on America's allies in the region doing more. But America's allies are going to need some more specifics, consistent specific guidance in order to make that happen.
All right, so let's talk about the Saudis. Before Pompeo left, the State Department said he would be pressing them, the Saudis, on the details of the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, and even said the Saudis had not come up with a credible explanation for what happened. Has there been any progress on that?
So yesterday was actually the 100-day anniversary of Khashoggi's murder, and Secretary Pompeo, again, gave this big speech in Egypt, and he didn't mention him. He talked about Saudi Arabia 6 times. All of them were in positive context. Saudi Arabia helping the U.S. to counter Iran, Saudi Arabia in partnership with other Gulf states, Saudi Arabia as an ally. Today, Secretary Pompeo, like you mentioned earlier, is in Bahrain for, among other things, a working lunch with leaders that will include Crown Prince bin Salman, whom U.S. intelligence officials say was likely complicit in Khashoggi's murder and dismemberment in that Turkish embassy. But we haven't heard whether or not we've gotten any more information from the Saudi government on exactly what happened, who went down, and who was responsible.
Yeah, understanding, obviously, Christina, that Saudi Arabia remains a strategic partner for the United States in a lot of other issues. David Ignatius in the Washington Post does have a piece today where he essentially says that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, is really continuing unfettered with the same sort of policy outlooks that he had always had and enjoyed before the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which means jailing dissidents, cracking down on any kind of threats, politically or otherwise, within his borders and beyond, as we saw with the murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey.
Well, and the administration doesn't really seem to be treating him any differently. They haven't canceled any meetings. They haven't avoided him. You know, they haven't gone into these meetings saying, well, we're going to talk about security, but first we have to get this off the table. Before Pompeo left, a senior State Department official referred to the murder as an albatross around the neck of the Saudi government and said they really need to clarify this and they need to bring the right people to justice. And yet there hasn't been a lot of follow through on this trip when there's going to be several opportunities to bring it up.
So one more thing from Pompeo's speech yesterday. He covered a lot of topics, but he seemed to blame the previous administration for their failure in the region. I'm wondering, I mean, this wouldn't be the first administration to blame the previous administration, though it is a narrative that we've heard in a lot of areas. I'm wondering if you have gotten any reaction
more frequently
to that.
than some of the others.
I mean, it wasn't subtle, right? He went to Egypt where Obama went 10 years ago. He stood in relatively the same geographical location and didn't refer to him by name, but said, you know, another American stood here and made all these promises. I spoke to 2 high-ranking former administration officials yesterday, both of whom were involved in foreign policy. Tommy Vietor, who's the former NSC spokesman, said the speech doesn't matter because the Trump administration's decision to back that Saudi regime after the killing of an American journalist says it all. Another senior senior member of the administration official told me the speech played into, quote, the worst traditions of U.S. foreign policy by embracing autocrats, again, including the Saudis. And there was also pushback against this line that Pompeo said, where America is a force for good and where we intervene in the Middle East, positive things happen. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad tweeted, whenever, wherever the U.S. interferes, chaos, repression, and resentment follow. He also added that the day Iran tries to emulate the U.S. foreign policy will be the day that hell freezes over.
I also thought to myself when I did hear that, I thought this is an America first policy. I thought that's what this administration didn't do, is intervene.
Well, so that's the question that I have, Christina. Did the secretary offer any specific examples of what he means when he made that point in his speech?
So he offered a lot of examples of what he means where we didn't get involved and bad things happened. And he had a point. You know, he talked about the red line in Syria, not getting involved when Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against his own people. He talked about, you know, places we've withdrawn our forces from and chaos has followed. But contradictorily, in the same speech, he then said that U.S. forces were getting out of Syria. And as we all know, there's a big fear that if U.S. troops leave that region, it will be filled with Iran or other terrorist groups. So there were a lot of contradictions and not a lot of specifics that illustrated the U.S. as a force for good, other than, you know, regional alliances and fighting al-Qaeda and fighting ISIS and the battle against ISIS, which has been, to this point, successful.
Interesting.
Yeah. Christina, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.